Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome, students, to today's Explainer. You know, when we picture World War II bomber combat, it's so easy to just get completely swept up in that romantic Hollywood myth, right? We imagine soaring music, totally pristine aircraft, and absolutely flawless heroes. But the terrifying reality of what these young guys actually faced up there in the skies over Europe, yeah, it was vastly different. So today we're ripping up that Hollywood script to uncover the true story of the most famous aircraft of the entire war, the Memphis Belle. We're going to look at the men, the machine, and the media spin that literally created a legend.
To really understand their world, you've got to look at the lethal math, 20%. If you were a B-17 crew member flying over Europe back in 1943, you had only a 1 in 5 chance of surviving your combat tour. I mean, just think about that for a second. You had an 80% chance of being shot down, captured, or killed. It was a literal statistical meat grinder. And these young men, they knew it every single time they stepped onto the tarmac.
So here's our quick roadmap for today. First, naming the Memphis Belle. Second, the lethal math of survival. Third, the harsh reality of combat. Fourth, Hell's Angels and PR spin. And finally, preserving a national artifact. Let's get to it.
Section 1. Naming the Memphis Belle, and the story behind that incredibly iconic nose art.
So get this, it almost had a completely different name. The bomber's pilot was 24-year-old Robert Morgan, and he had a sweetheart named Margaret Polk. Margaret was from Memphis, Tennessee, and Morgan originally thought about christening his brand new B-17 Little One, which was his pet name for her. It's a super sweet thought, but history took a sharp left turn inside an Army-based movie theater. Morgan and his co-pilot went to check out a new Hollywood release called Lady for a Night, and this movie featured a riverboat, a gambling riverboat named the Memphis Belle.
The exact moment Morgan heard the phrase Memphis Belle spoken on screen, he supposedly stood right up in the middle of the theater and shouted, "That's what I'm going to name my plane." Just like that, Little One was officially rejected. That totally spontaneous reaction cemented the aircraft's identity, giving it a name that perfectly evokes Southern gentility, charm, and grace, which is honestly a massive contrast to the brutal, devastating job the plane was built to do.
Moving on to Section 2, the lethal math of survival and the true cost of 25 missions.
See, the Army Air Forces had this policy. If a crew could successfully fly 25 combat missions, they got to go home. Simple as that. It gave the men a specific target, a tiny shred of hope to cling to. But the crucial point is, in 1943, the odds of actually hitting that number were just staggeringly low. Completing 25 missions was a monumental, almost statistically impossible achievement early in the war. This was way before later combat stages when survival rates finally started to improve.
When you look at official documents from the time, they really detail the severe pressures of that 25 mission limit. Command was losing about 10% of its bomber force on every single raid. Doing the simple math meant that, statistically speaking, an airman was living on borrowed time by his 11th mission. Every flight after that, you were pushing your luck against absolutely overwhelming odds. The emotional toll of seeing empty cots in the barracks after every single raid must have been just unimaginable.
That brings us to Section 3, the harsh reality of combat and life at 25,000 feet. To really grasp what this was like, let me step into the boots of an 18-year-old kid for a second, sitting inside a freezing, thin aluminum tube heading straight into enemy territory.
The only thing keeping us in the sky are Wright R-1820-97 engines. We had 4 of these massive 1,200 horsepower turbo-supercharged radials roaring out on the wings. Technically speaking, we absolutely needed them for our long-range bomber missions. They were what allowed us to lug 8,000-pound bomb loads all the way up to 30,000 feet, desperately trying to stay above the absolute worst of the anti-aircraft ground fire.
But man, flying that high was just brutal. Our cabins were completely unpressurized, the temperature would totally plummet to negative 20 or 30 degrees, meaning we had to wear these bulky, electrically heated suits just to survive the freezing cold. We were constantly, frantically checking our oxygen systems to avoid anoxia, oxygen starvation, which could quietly put you to sleep forever without you even realizing it. Add to that the enemy fighters attacking us head-on, and the anti-aircraft flak so incredibly thick we joked you could literally walk on it. We endured that terrifying sensory overload for 6 to 8 hours at a time.
And because of this extreme environment, our ship wasn't exactly a pristine, shiny machine. The Memphis Belle sustained some seriously devastating physical damage over its 20,000 miles of combat. We're talking 9 engines destroyed. Both of our wings had to be replaced, the landing gear was crippled, and we had 2 entire tails replaced. We came back from missions absolutely chewed up, filled with bullet and flak holes. Every time a part was replaced,
it meant we'd survived a near-fatal encounter.
All right, stepping back out of those boots, let's look at Section 4, Hells Angels and PR Spin, the bomber that was actually first.
Now, what's really interesting about this is, despite everything you've probably heard, there is a massive historical twist here. The Memphis Belle was not the first B-17 to complete 25 missions. No way. The true first finisher was actually a B-17 named Hells Angels, which successfully wrapped up its 25th mission on May 13, 1943. The Memphis Belle finished its 25th almost a whole week later on May 19th. So suddenly the 8th Air Force had two incredible success stories. Amazing for morale, right? Well, sure, but they also had a massive public relations nightmare on their hands. See, the military desperately wanted to send a victorious bomber and its crew back to the States for a massive 30-stop national war bond tour. The goal was to boost civilian morale and raise much-needed money for the war effort. But the military brass knew that the American public, who were largely conservative and deeply religious back then, would express absolute moral outrage if a plane named Hells Angels toured the country as the gleaming representative of America's fine young men. So they just changed the order of seniority. The Memphis Belle, with its Southern-charmed, God-fearing name, received the official recognition over Hells Angels, and boom, it became the official face of the American bomber effort.
Which leads us to Section 5, Preserving a National Artifact. From scrap metal to museum centerpiece.
The post-war fates of these two incredible machines were entirely driven by that fame. Hells Angels stayed in Europe and actually went on to fly an astounding 48 missions. But when the war ended, it was completely forgotten. In August 1945, the true first finisher was unceremoniously sold for scrap metal. It was likely melted down into aluminum siding for American houses in the 1950s. Tragic, right? The Memphis Belle, however, was saved directly because of the fame generated by its war bond tour and a famous 1944 documentary. It completely escaped the scrappers, was preserved, and after years of meticulous restoration by experts, it now sits safely on permanent display at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. Preserving it is absolutely crucial because it gives future generations a tangible, physical artifact to really help them understand the sacrifice of the men who fought the combined bomber offensive.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question to think critically about. How does public relations and media spin literally change the way we remember history? The Memphis Belle is, without a doubt, a true icon of heroism and mechanical endurance. But its place in our memory was ultimately solidified by a PR decision over a name. It kind of makes you wonder, right? What other incredible historical achievements have been completely forgotten simply because they didn't test well with the public? Keep that in mind the next time you hear a legendary story. Thanks for hanging out, and as always, keep asking questions.